Strange how the best moments of our lives we scarcely notice, except in looking back. Today I finished Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, one of the first law books, and overall I liked it, but it didn't quite live up to its own potential. Joe Abercrombie is one of my all-time favorite writers. I love the way he writes. I love his character writing, I love his action, and I love the way that he subverts tropes, ideas, and themes. And I just feel like Red Country is missing out on what it could have been. Because if you've never read a Joe Abercrombie book, what he does, especially in the First Law trilogy, but in all of his novels, is subvert expectations and ideas. Like, for example, the First Law trilogy is a subversion of the Lord of the Rings. I mean, it is literally the exact same idea, except painted in a cynical setting and in a cynical way. Like, for example, he'll subvert the idea of fellowship, or he'll subvert the idea of heroism, or he'll subvert the idea of, good endings and all those kinds of things. And he's always making commentary on how people typically write or consume or think of a genre. And he usually paints it with a very cynical, humans are bad way, right? And in Red Country, he does that, but I don't think he goes far enough, because Red Country is a Western with swords. You replace the guns with the swords, and you put in the First Law universe, it is literally a Western. The setup is entirely Western. A bunch of people come and kidnap children off a farm, and the farmer and his, stepdaughter have to go off and hunt these men down who have kidnapped the kids that they care about. And, the farmer is a returning character. I'm not going to say who, but the second you get a description of him, you'll know exactly who I mean. And I felt like that idea was really good, especially with this returning character, who is, I think, Joe Abercrombie's best. I think this is his best written character, hands down. And what we get instead is this kind of just weirdly paced, book. I don't know how else to describe it. There are elements I really like about this book. Joe Abercrombie is firing on all cylinders when it comes to character work. It's exceptional as always. If you like Joe Abercrombie's characters, you're not going to dislike this one, right? If you like his action and his set pieces and how he does that and how he subverts certain ideas, he does that really well. There's this whole setup with this idea of, I don't want to spoil it, but this mythical creature, and the way he subverts it I thought was really fun. And the revenge story I liked the idea of the plot, but I found I thought that this should be one of those ones where Joe is on the gas all the time, and he's not. This should have been a high-octane, just bloodbath of a book. And there are moments where Joe does that, and he does it very, very well. But I just felt like the pacing here was really odd, because this book is 20 hours on audio, so it's 500 plus pages, and I feel like the beginning is really good, and the end is exceptional, but the middle is where it really struggles, because while Shy and Lamb, who are the main characters, are kind of trying to get to their destination, which is, the far country, the pacing here is odd. It slows down when it should be speeding up, and I just felt like that chunk of the book did not necessarily need to exist, or if it had to exist, it could have been filled in with some interesting commentary, or more action sequences, and it just wasn't. So I thought the pacing in this was not good, especially for a First Law book, which I typically think is paced very well. I think Joe Abercrombie is usually on the ball when it comes to pacing, but this one wasn't. And going back to my complaints about the thematic work here, that is something I think Joe Abercrombie does really well. I think even if you don't absolutely, love the kind of grimdark, cynical nature of his books, you can't deny that the guy really is good at subverting expectations and the fantasy genre norms. He's really good at subverting ideas like heroism and fellowship and humans being able to redeem themselves, which is a huge fantasy idea. It's a huge fantasy trope. It's why the genre exists. It's supposed to be that work of men can be better if given the chance. And Joe just always subverts that. And I feel like with a setting that is supposed to be a Western, there's so much commentary you could do here. You could do so much commentary on Native Americans and how Westerns have typically portrayed them as horrible savages, even though they were way ahead of the curve on some things, like bathing themselves. Or you could do a commentary on, how these towns were run out in the West and how they were lawless and horrible. And he kind of does that, but I don't think he goes far enough to really exemplify the fact that, at least here in America, when we expanded out West, we just exploited the land and the people until there was nothing left. He could do that, but he didn't quite go far enough. And I just felt like the sauce here was missing. I felt like that secret ingredient that he puts into his other books was just lacking here. It kind of felt like he really wanted to do a Western, and he wanted to talk about these things. He wanted to have a conversation about, the typical Western that is written here in America or filmed here in America, but he didn't quite commit to it the whole way. Instead, he just does this kind of half-baked idea that's just a little too long in the tooth. This could have been like a 350-page book, and if it had been condensed down and he had really hammered home some points, I really, really think that this could have been something special, but unfortunately it wasn't. Again, I don't want people to get this idea that it's a bad book. It's Joe Abercrombie. I don't think he's capable of writing a bad book, but the potential that a book like this has is incredibly high, and it just doesn't quite meet my expectations. The character writing is still good. The action sequences are still good. I love the characters that are introduced here and reintroduced here. I thought the action scenes were great, and the humor, Joe Abercrombie, in my opinion, has the funniest sense of humor in any fantasy author, period. Matt Dinniman doesn't touch Joe Abercrombie, in my opinion. His humor just works every time for me, and there were some serious laugh-out-loud moments in this book. But unfortunately, some of the things I just complained about hold it back from being a really good or really exceptional book. Overall, I'm going to give it like an 8.2 out of 10, but I am looking forward to Age of Madness, which I hear is exceptionally good.